A woven sandal, nearly 3,000 years old, still holds its shape inside a Kentucky archive, pulled from dry mountain stone, not a tomb. Appalachia doesn't preserve things easily. It floods, freezes, and rots through most of what people leave behind. But scattered through its sandstone cliffs are shallow shelters, sealed dry for millennia, holding cloth, tools, and remains that survive almost nowhere else in the East. 9 of these sites carry a detail the record never fully closes. One keeps its strangest find locked away entirely. That's where we're headed. Number 9. Robinson Cave, Tennessee. Robinson Cave sits in a low bluff above the Cumberland Plateau, unremarkable from the outside. Just another sandstone overhang among hundreds scattered through eastern Tennessee. Excavated in the mid-20th century, it produced a stratified sequence of hearths and stone tools spanning several thousand years of intermittent use. Exactly what archaeologists expect from a shelter this size. What sets Robinson Cave apart is a single radiocarbon date from its lowest hearth layer, one that came back centuries older than the tool styles found beside it should allow. Researchers at the time attributed it to contamination, old carbon washed down from somewhere above, mixing with younger charcoal. That explanation has never been retested. The sample itself was used up in the original analysis, and no comparable material has been recovered since. Robinson Cave remains open to researchers today, its collection housed at a regional university, its one unresolved date sitting quietly in a report almost nobody outside the field has read. A small footnote, but not the last one on this list. 90 miles east, a shelter with a very different kind of problem was waiting to be dug into it all. Number 8. Icehouse Bottom, Tennessee. Icehouse Bottom nearly disappeared before anyone got the chance to study it. Located along the Little Tennessee River, the site sat directly in the path of a federal dam project in the 1970s, and archaeologists had only a narrow window to excavate before the reservoir rose and buried it for good. What they recovered in that rushed window pushed the record of early plant cultivation in eastern North America back further than most researchers expected. Squash and gourd remains dated to nearly 5,000 years old, among the earliest such evidence found anywhere in the region. The dig was, by most accounts, a genuine success under brutal time pressure. The unresolved part isn't the plants. It's a cluster of post holes in the upper layers, arranged in a pattern the original report describes only as not readily interpretable, never assigned to any known structure type used in the area. No follow-up study was possible. The site is underwater now, permanently, and whatever those post holes belong to went under the reservoir with everything else nobody had time to finish asking about. Some questions get lost to time. Others, like the one waiting in Kentucky's Red River Gorge, get buried in an argument that's still going on. Number 7. Newt Cache Hollow Shelter, Kentucky. Newt Cache Hollow produced one of the richest perishable artifact collections ever recovered from an eastern rock shelter. Sandals, textile fragments, and cultivated plant remains, excavated by William Webb's crew in the 1930s and still cited in archaeology textbooks today. For decades it stood as one of the clearest windows anyone had into pre-contact life in the region. The disagreement started later, once radiocarbon dating became available and researchers went back to redate the cultivated seed remains found there. Different labs, testing samples from the same collection, returned results spanning nearly 1,000 years. Not because the site was disturbed, most agree, but because the dating techniques of different eras kept refining the same evidence into different answers. Every new method has narrowed the range. None has closed it completely. The seeds themselves remain some of the earliest evidence of plant domestication in North America. Historians simply disagree, to this day, on precisely how early. Not every shelter argues over dates. The next one argues over who was allowed inside it at all. Number 6. Albans Site, West Virginia. The Street Albans site sits along the Kanawha River, technically a stratified riverbank deposit rather than a classic overhang shelter, but it shares the same defining trait. Layer after undisturbed layer, reaching back further than almost anywhere else in the state. Excavated in the 1960s, it produced tool types associated with some of the earliest confirmed human activity in West Virginia. The site's deepest, oldest layers produced radiocarbon dates that some researchers accepted without dispute and others rejected outright, arguing the samples may have been contaminated by older carbon in the surrounding soil. That disagreement was never formally resolved. Both readings remain in the published literature side by side. Decades later, neither one retracted. If you want to know how deep that kind of scientific standoff can run, wait until we reach the shelter where two separate excavation crews, working the same site 20 years apart, couldn't agree on what they'd actually found. That's coming. First, a shelter where the dispute isn't about dates at all. It's about a burial that shouldn't have been where it was. Number 5. An unnamed shelter, Kentucky-Virginia border. In 1962, a field crew working a shelter along the Kentucky-Virginia line pulled human remains from two separate depths within the same excavation unit. And the deeper burial came back dated centuries younger than the one resting above it. Stratigraphy runs one direction, almost without exception. Deeper means older. This one ran backward. The excavation's lead researcher flagged the reversal in her field report as requiring further study. That study never happened. Funding lapsed. The collection went into storage at a regional university, and both burials have sat there ever since. The contradiction never formally resolved by anyone who came after her. Local Cherokee oral tradition names certain shelters in this stretch of ridge as places tied to the Nunahi and the Unweet-Sunstee, accounts describing specific instructions about which shelters to enter and which to leave undisturbed. Whether that tradition applies to this exact site was never recorded by the 1962 crew. What survives instead is simply the inversion itself, sitting unresolved in a box, and hikers today who report a compass needle that won't settle near the shelter mouth. Anecdotal, unverified, but persistent enough that it keeps getting mentioned by people who've never read the original report. If a burial can end up younger than the ground beneath it, you start to wonder what else in these collections has never been double-checked. That's exactly the kind of gap this channel keeps digging into. If that's the sort of thing you want more of, subscribing costs nothing and helps these buried reports actually get read. The next shelter isn't missing an answer. It's missing an entire excavation nobody officially admits happened. Number 4. Cloudsplitter Rockshelter, Kentucky. Cloudsplitter sits deep in the Red River Gorge, and its official excavation history is straightforward. Surveyed and tested in the 1970s, and again more thoroughly in subsequent decades, producing evidence of early plant cultivation alongside a long sequence of hunting and gathering deposits. It's one of the better documented shelters in the entire region. What complicates that record is a set of field photographs from an early 1960s survey, taken nearly a decade before any formal excavation is listed as having occurred there. The photographs show clear digging in progress, tools laid out, spoil piled beside the entrance. No report, no permit, and no institution has ever claimed that work as its own. Later researchers have proposed it was an unpermitted amateur dig, undocumented and never reported to the state. Plausible, and consistent with how loosely regulated rock shelter digging was in that era. But no one has ever confirmed who was behind it. and whatever was removed from the shelter before its official excavation began has never been traced to any known collection. Cloudsplitter's real excavation record is excellent. Its unofficial one is a decade-long blank spot nobody has ever been able to fill in, and it's a small taste of what's waiting 3 shelters from now, where an entire excavation's worth of material has simply vanished from the public record. Number 3. Meadowcroft Rockshelter, Pennsylvania. Meadowcroft is the most scientifically significant site on this list, and also its most contested. Excavated continuously from the 1970s onward, the shelter produced a sequence of radiocarbon dates suggesting human occupation in North America nearly 2,000 years earlier than the long-accepted Clovis First timeline, a claim that, if fully accepted, would rewrite how humans are believed to have first reached this continent. The excavators stood by their dates for decades. A significant portion of the archaeological community did not. Critics argued that coal deposits in the surrounding geology could have contaminated the radiocarbon samples with older carbon, artificially inflating the site's apparent age, a technical dispute that has never been definitively settled to the satisfaction of every party involved, even after additional testing rounds meant to resolve it. This isn't a fringe theory or a local legend. It's one of the most cited disputes in North American archaeology, argued in peer-reviewed journals by researchers with nothing to gain from manufacturing controversy. Meadowcroft's advocates call it proof that people were here far earlier than textbooks admit. Its skeptics call it an open question that contamination alone could fully explain. Neither side has convinced the other. Everything up to this point has had documentation behind it, field reports, published dates, named researchers standing publicly by their findings. The next shelter has almost none of that, and that absence is exactly what's kept its story circulating for over 60 years. Number 2. Russell Cave, Alabama. Russell Cave, now a national monument, holds one of the longest continuous occupation sequences documented in the southeastern United States. Nearly 10,000 years of intermittent human use, layer stacked on layer, excavated across multiple seasons by the Smithsonian starting in the late 1950s. Buried deep within that sequence, researchers recovered evidence some interpreted as ceremonial or ritual deposits, specific arrangements of tools and remains that didn't match the ordinary domestic debris found throughout the rest of the site. The original excavators described the pattern cautiously, noting only that its purpose remained unclear. Later researchers have offered competing interpretations, and no consensus has ever fully formed around what those deposits actually represent. What makes Russell Cave different from every shelter before it on this list isn't the mystery itself. Plenty of these sites carry one. It's the scale of what's undisputed around it. Nearly 10,000 years of confirmed human presence. One of the longest such records anywhere east of the Mississippi, with a single unresolved thread still running through the middle of it, never fully explained by the very institution that dug it up. One shelter remains. Its evidence is thinner than anything we've covered so far, its records harder to verify, and that thinness is exactly why the story has survived as long as it has. Number 1. Big Bone Cave, Tennessee. Big Bone Cave isn't just a rock shelter. It's a true cave system, mined for saltpeter during the War of 1812 and explored on and off ever since. Its deeper chambers still not fully surveyed to this day. Somewhere inside those chambers, according to accounts passed down through generations of local cavers, 19th century miners came across a set of well-preserved human remains, dry cave conditions having kept them intact far longer than burial in open ground ever could. Here's where the evidence thins. No formal excavation report from that era survives, if one was ever written at all. What exists instead is secondhand testimony, repeated across decades by people who never saw the remains firsthand, alongside a handful of early 20th century newspaper mentions too vague to serve as confirmation. Historians who've tried to trace the story further consistently hit the same wall. No accession record, no institution claiming custody, no photograph anyone has been able to produce. That absence cuts both ways. It means the account can't be verified, and it also means it's never been formally disproven either. The deeper sections of Big Bone Cave remain difficult to access even now, partially unmapped, and cavers who've explored the system in recent decades report finding side passages that don't appear on any existing survey. Every other shelter on this list left behind a paper trail, thin in places, but real. Big Bone Cave left behind almost nothing, and it's precisely the emptiness, the complete absence of the kind of record every other site on this list has, that's kept the story alive for over a century. 9 shelters, 9 different kinds of evidence, some rock solid, some barely a rumor. But the same question sits underneath every one of them. How much of what these mountains are still holding has simply never been looked at closely enough? Tell us which shelter you'd want excavated first, and subscribe, because the 9th one won't be the last we go looking for.